my co-host, Li Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Li and I discuss today is based on our opinions. It should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you help us please get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week where we hopefully will be back to Friday. I don't know if that's going to be possible though. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at NIO Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. A packing for Munich. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. In about 24 hours, I start my trip. So good morning from my side. This is your co-host Li Xing speaking, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 131. How do you top the blockbuster news of the century that shook the automotive world? Well, you follow it up with another blockbuster move, and I'm speaking of XPeng. So a month after the Volkswagen investment into XPeng and the platform collaboration, XPeng announced the strategic partnership with Didi. What's your initial reaction?
So XPeng has been a busy beaver the last few months, or last 12, 18 months, because these discussions probably started over a year ago with Volkswagen and Didi. And we point back to what everybody thought. The price war was going to push consolidation. And what we're seeing is less about consolidation and more about ridding assets so that the balance sheets look a little bit better for some of these companies. And for, the Volkswagen XPeng transaction, it was a desperate move for Volkswagen, but XPeng seems to be really, really trying to broaden itself a little bit and diversifying some of that risk into out of just buying and selling cars, but then creating other brands and things like that. So BYD has started a trend. NIO is going to be launching multiple brands. So I think this makes a ton of sense. You?
Well, the first few reaction I had was, first of all, on the Didi EV itself, how much that was under the radar, because XPeng tweeted an interview with Brian Gu, and the first thing he said on the interview was how almost complete this Mona is. And, barring the current environment, the entry regulations, we could have been seeing a Didi EV or Didi EV Inc. So that's number one. And second is the way this was structured, right? I think you don't see this anywhere else, or I haven't seen this in other cases, is this sort of valuation adjustment mechanism. I don't know if that's the right financial term for it. Basically, I have to sell a certain number of vehicles in order to receive the as high as 5% share in XPeng. So I think these are the two interesting things. And then the other one is just what you mentioned, that what the heck, XPeng is going with a multi-brand strategy. I didn't think that we know they were going to launch a 150,000 RMB, let's say, a model, but we didn't know that they were going to do this through a different brand and utilizing actually Didi's vehicle development. So I thought that was interesting.
So this points back to, now we're getting into much more of the traditional automotive kind of levers and pulleys, because scale is where you get cost advantages. And so with XPeng struggling to get to 15, 20,000 units a month and hundreds of thousands of units of capacity hanging over their heads, and this is not just an XPeng thing, there are many EV startups in China that have hundreds of thousands of units of excess capacity that they need to do something with. I think selling some of that capacity effectively to Volkswagen and then diversifying out into the mass market, where you had mentioned 150,000, that's in direct competition with BYD, by the way. So at 150,000, we know that that's where the volume is. So they're trying to utilize, or they're trying to get into the mass market to get rid of some of that, or not get rid of, but let's just say sell some of that capacity to the market so that they can likely focus on the XPeng brand to be a bit more premium, higher margin, and vehicle services, connected services. So this is where, if you are an automaker, it doesn't matter if you're an EV maker or an ICE maker, scale is extremely, extremely important to profitability.
And using DD's vast mobility ride-hailing network as a leverage or a scale, I think that's one of the things.
And you had mentioned the sales volume thing, the 5% thing, right? To me, that's a formality because there's so many DD drivers, and eventually they're going to have to get electrified. So it seems like that was more of a formality kind of clause than anything else.
Yeah, clauses basically they get 3.25% issued by A share issued by XPeng, and upon SOP they get another, I guess, tranche. And then once you get to the first stage, which is like 13 months after SOP, you needed to get like 100,000 units, and then another 12 months after that. Once those are completed, you get to that 5%. I think and that was in the and then that's worth about $744 million, I think.
Which brings me to this curious point or intriguing point: isn't DD working with Toyota on the autonomous stuff? I thought they were. What? No,
I think they're working with Volvo.
Okay.
Yeah, on autonomous stuff, and then they spun off the CargoBot, which is the trucking.
Okay, because
autonomous.
It still makes strange bedfellows now because XPeng is tied to Volkswagen, is tied to DD, and so it creates potentially in the future some tension between all these different brands, with XPeng being the common denominator. So something to look out for and keep an eye out for.
Yeah, and it'll also be interesting if DD would in fact be using XPeng's G9 robotaxi that they've been testing. That's another possible collaboration, which will be kind of in conflict with what they're doing with Volvo, sort of.
Yes. So there's, like I said, I think they are they're fighting for tomorrow, and maybe that's to the detriment of long-term strategy, because now XPeng is dealing with multiple entities, some that are not Chinese, and that thins out management, kind of being able to manage this diverse set of not only products and services, but manage relationships. And so I believe He Xiaopeng and Brian Gu are amazing managers, but I mean, there comes a point where they're starting to spread themselves a bit too thin, I think. Yeah.
And I think for DD on Cheng Wei's part, it's probably, get this burden off my shoulder. And so that's kind of
A quick reminder to everyone that DD was in the doghouse for about a year and a half. So even if they were working behind the scenes back in the lab on amazing, amazing services, products, partnerships.
They had 2,000 people work on this car. So.
Yeah. And it goes to show because, and it's probably mostly a software thing. Well, I think kind of integrating it into, and I'm jumping around, so I apologize, but this is kind of sort of what, in another sense, what a Deep Route and a WeRide is doing with the SOEs that they're working with. They're converging into providing hardware and ADAS services to traditional OEMs and SOEs in order to scale their businesses. So
yeah, and I had tweeted, this is like one of those killing many birds with one stone, right? I mean, the multi-brand strategy, the asset, the development R&D asset, the car itself, XPeng's the multi-brand strategy, scaling, volume effects. So I guess it worked out for the two parties.
Just really quickly, because I'd love to get your thoughts. The one thing that is a bit challenging for me is at 150,000 RMB price point, because the G6 and the G9, I've not seen the interior of the G6, but the G9 and some of the XPeng vehicles, the fit and finish on the interior is okay. It's not $45,000 level, in my opinion.
No, it's definitely not NIO or Li Auto. Let's just say that. Yeah.
So how they reconcile that 150 versus the 250 is going to be interesting. Is it a software feature thing, or is it, interior? Because the current interiors aren't super great. So how much lower can you get? Right.
Yeah. So I don't know, and also looking forward, this what exactly this 150,000 A-class smart EV, what is it gonna do? Like I had pondered whether this is gonna be some kind of a consumer AV type of vehicle that can be used on both to be the ride-hailing network for the drivers and also to the private consumers. And it looks like He Xiaopeng said that he expects 100,000 units volume on the to C alone. So I guess that's a move downward into that, the as you said, the BYD, right? The BYD range.
Because there's pressure for them to build more factories.
Well, they already have 3, right?
Yeah, but they can't sell that capacity yet. And, with Tesla looking at trying to increase capacity, BYD increasing battery capacity and manufacturing capacity, XPeng, NIO, Li Auto, they all have pressure to build more factories, even though they can't sell all of their capacity yet. So,
yeah. And it's good to see, the latest rankings released by Li Auto. It's good to see that the Wei Xiaoli now again at the top among the startups, at least. And kind of like, the Li Auto reducing prices today, cutting prices. Not cutting prices, but giving the insurance subsidy.
A non-price reduction, price
reduction. It's showing that, like everybody's get sucked into it, right?
Well, the Tesla stands are talking about, well, Tesla hasn't reduced price, but they're offering insurance subsidies. So same. But, I don't want to beat a dead horse. Volkswagen, again, is reducing price. And so the price war is not going to end anytime soon.
Yeah, I think the fine print in the let's just say Xiaodi partnership calls for actually 360,000 for 2 years. That's a significant volume, and which we're waiting to see whether that can be achieved. Right? It looks good, easy on paper, but considering the D1 on the DD platform is a flop.
Yeah,
remember that?
Mm-hmm.
The volume not so great, and then they changed it to a 2C vehicle, and it didn't sell that much. And this was only 2-3 years ago.
Yeah,
21, right? So
it is like a unicorn, right? You see one on the street, and then you take a picture of it because you might not see another one for a while. So
yeah, so the potential is great. It looks good on paper, win-win, but we'll see.
So I saw this statistic that China is at around a 38% take rate on NEVs last quarter. So last year we hit 22 million vehicles in China. So 40% of 22, that's close to 9 million units. I'm just trying to create perspective on this 300,000 unit number that you're talking about. So it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a ton of share in the China market. But I think for companies like XPeng, it's more important to look at growth month over month, year over year, as opposed to total volumes. Because first of all, they probably have 500,000 units total of capacity. So they need to be consistently over 70, 80% before they can comfortably add more capacity, because you shouldn't be really adding capacity if you're at a utilization rate from a factory level at around 50%, less than 50%, right? So that's and these companies are publicly traded. So we interact with the XPeng stands, the NIO stands all day long on Twitter, right? So
yeah, and XPeng, before mid-decade, they still have like 4 to 5 models that they'll launch under the XPeng brand. Plus, at least one, this Mona comes out next year, and there's probably more after that that'll support kind of, the capacity, right? Hopefully.
Yeah. And this is in stark contrast with the traditional product life cycle for the traditional automotive sector, which is normally between 3 and 5 years. And for companies like a Volkswagen or a GM, for a high runner, you might sell 1, 2, 3 million units of a product before you do any type of major update or major refresh. Normally it's a few hundred parts every year until the 3rd, 4th, or 5th year. Then you get into a major refresh. So these companies are really changing the game, and it's forcing the traditional automakers to throw out all of their current processes and policies and all their old ways of thinking in order to just try to keep up with the number of updates. Because in the last 12 months, NIO will have updated or refreshed their entire vehicle lineup.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point. Speaking of a way of doing things, given the current market environment, I'm talking about the policy environment, which is really the window is closing, and you've seen that play out, right? Jidu now becoming Jiyue exactly because of that. And then DD really, through this partnership, really letting that EV project go to XPeng's hands. And Huawei is kind of playing on the outside, inside. They're kind of like, and then Xiaomi, right? That's it. If you look at these outside tech companies, really it's Baidu and Xiaomi that are really the only ones left doing it on their own almost, right?
Huawei is straddling.
Yeah.
They don't want to be an automaker, but I don't think the brands that they've partnered with the exception of maybe Avatar, I don't know, like Series is not going to really be a high runner, a big sales brand for Huawei. So in order for them to succeed, they need their products, hardware, software stack in millions of cars. That's how I look at it. So,
but this Xiaodi partnership is the first in which an R&D project of one partner is taken over sort of by the other partner, and the share is contingent on vehicle sales volumes, right? So this has never been done in the industry, the way how this is being partnered.
And it's important to remember that DiDi, prior to the Chinese government putting them in the box, they had global ambitions. They wanted to crush Uber. And so when they came up or launched this vehicle idea, I'm sure they were looking at the IPO. They were trying to strategize how they could really become a global brand. And the constraint of not being able to generate new customers because DiDi was limited in how they can add users while they're in the doghouse. And so for a year and a half, they were kind of in limbo. So maybe they didn't have enough capital to follow through on execution of this branding. And they just looked at XPeng being a natural partner to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
So let's move on. So I talked to Reuters this week about the BYD Jabil transaction.
Huge.
Jabil is US-based contract manufacturer that makes final assembly and parts for companies like an Apple. And so they're the US version of a Foxconn, much smaller and not as ambitious. But they've sold 2 factories to BYD, one in Wuxi, one in Chengdu, is it?
Chengdu, yes.
For just over $2 billion.
For the Jabil circuit,
Yes.
Singapore.
Yeah.
Entity, yeah.
And they make PCBs. So PCB is a printed circuit board. So it's the green resin board that has transistors, resistors. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. Thoughts? What do you think? You said it's huge.
Well, first of all, this is the biggest acquisition by BYD to date, and it trumps the previous. I think this one was $2.2 billion, right? The previous was only 3.5 billion RMB, which is like, what, 500 million?
Yeah, that's $500 million maybe.
Yeah. So this is number one. Second, as you said, right, BYD is more than a EV company.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the electronics is a huge part of, not only on cars, but on the phone side of it.
That's their roots.
Yeah, that's the roots, yeah. And it's similar, I think, to what the Xiaodi partnership is. Other people's burden becomes...
Yeah.
One person's burden becomes the other person's treasure, right? Sort of.
Yeah, because of the price war, probably, bank accounts are low. And BYD, this transaction doesn't seem cheap, but, maybe they're starting to see assets that they can now afford that they couldn't have before. But I can't help but to think that BYD looks at this as maybe a potentially something that'll help them converge the mobile electronics into the actual EV. So I think there's more to it than just, I'm going to build out my electronics business, right?
And then the geopolitical factor of this thing is, okay, again, this is an American company now. It's right. BYD has bought part of, its assets outside of China, outside of the US. So,
and this is with the backdrop of Raimondo, the commerce secretary in China right now, talking and meeting with diplomats and Chinese diplomats about trade. So that shouldn't be lost. And then the other thing that was big news this week was NIO earnings. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. I know that you had tweeted something. So what do you think about that? The NIO earnings.
Well, NIO, we knew financially the numbers were bad for Q2.
They were worse than the analysts thought, though. So
right. I mean, they still had positive margins, which was compared to XPeng's negative margins, and comparing their premium positioning and compare they're much better off. They were much better off. And then they throw out this guidance on Q3, which is going to be all-time high. And then the small details of what's happening with their product planning and delivery. Something that William Li mentioned I thought was interesting was the desire to hire more salespeople to reach the so-called sales capability of 30,000 a month to deliver 20,000 plus a month. I thought that was kind of interesting.
I read that, Lei, as the retail stores aren't doing a good enough job of selling the product. That's how I read that.
These, if you look at the Li Auto earnings and if you look at if you heard the NIO earnings, even though they're the BBAs are still a benchmark in certain aspects that they're trying to copy, right? So again, William Li mentioned about how in terms of sales and touch points, I think one thing he mentioned was in Anhui province, like Hefei takes up 80 to 90% of sales of NIO, whereas the BBAs is much more spread out. And that's why he wants to expand the touch points to balance it out a little bit. So it looks like the SG&A is going to continue to go up.
And we should remember that with NIO in particular, it's not just, let me find a mall with an open retail location, because once you move into tier 2, tier 3, you got to bring the charging infrastructure, you got to bring the swapping stations.
I'll tell you this, from a direct being in China for 2 months, I went to quite a few NIO stores and Li Auto stores. Comparatively, Li Auto stores definitely have many, many more sales associates compared to NIO. I think NIO has done a good job in terms of deliveries, but as William Li mentioned, I guess they need more sales.
Yeah, NIO retail stores are like laissez-faire. You just go in there, no pressure. They have that coffee shop vibe, but that nobody's bugging you. But sales is I'd say that's fair. That's a fair point. Yeah. And he did say there's much more delivery service. Let's say the power swap stations. These service related personnel are much more higher than the other competitors. And remember, when you open new retail stores and hire new sales agents or sales associates, then there's a training component that needs to be also thought through and considered and paid for. So Tesla, they've opened retail stores. They never really focused on the service side of things. And so I think that's one of the things that a Li Auto, an XPeng, and a NIO need to really, really take on and have it be a part of their branding, with NIO specifically, because they're probably the most customer-friendly brand. Li Auto is very family-oriented, but NIO kind of leans into we're a customer brand, right? We're a consumer brand. So if you don't have that on after-sales service, then it's kind of hollowed out. So
yeah. And then the other information revealed on the product side is one, no new products next year for the NIO brand. Two,
That's a risk.
the Alps, the verification build of the Alps brand has rolled off, and they're plan to launch that second half of next year. And the phone is coming end of September.
And the refreshed EC6 as well.
EC6 is also end of September. So that's on the product side. And then our good friend Edison asked the question about partnerships. So it remains, it's a very, what you call it? The answer is we've all heard before, right? They said there are
no comment
in discussions, right, with OEMs and they're open. I think the upside is for NIO to become kind of a supplier. There's three things. So the power swap, who's going to be a third party utilizing the power swap? NIO's building their own battery. So the BF1 is under construction. The EDS, electric drive system, is another potential for a third party OEM to buy. So these are the kind of the things that we can look forward to, but nothing official yet. And
we have to remember that if these don't generate significant revenue streams, then they're kind of distractions. Like the phone, if the phone is not successful in, let's say, its first year, it's going to be really, really difficult for Li Ben to justify and rationalize that to his investors. So,
he said he's not expecting his phone to compete with other phone companies. It's just a kind of a add-on or complementary to the NIO user. So I guess we'll see what the take rate is for the...
Has pricing been announced?
No, not yet. But I figure it'll be, I don't know, 5,000, 6,000 RMB.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
Because I can see Lei Jun being like, dude, you want to compete in phones? I'm going to compete in EVs. So...
Yeah. And then the other thing was the 100,000 customers take rate of the NOP Plus. That was interesting.
What do you know about Chang'an Qiyuan?
The only thing I know about is that it looks like a XPeng P7.
Yes.
And the name even has a number 7 in it.
Yeah, and the front fascia, the front end is almost exact.
Yeah.
So, but they want to sell 1.5 million units by 2030?
Yeah, those numbers are really lofty.
Some analysts predict that the China market could hit 28 to 30 million units by 2030.
You're talking about the NEVs?
No, just the passenger vehicle market. So if NEVs hit 60, 70% by 2030, then we would be talking about 15 million NEVs in 2030 and 3, 4, 5 million.
It just sounds small, 15 million, because we're going to get to 8, 9 million this year. And in 7 years, we're only going to get to 15 million.
But you know how that is. The first 20, 25% is easy.
It's
right?
faster.
And then because we have to remember that China's largest companies are oil companies. So they're not going to really want, I think they're towing the line because the Chinese government is pushing for NEV adoption. But if they don't have an alternate business that can generate the types of revenues that they've been generating, which make them the largest companies in the world, then they're likely just paying lip service and trying to figure out ways to extend that runway for themselves. That's how I look at it. And I'm talking about CNOOC, Sinopec, and those companies, Lei. But let's do this. We've been talking for, it looks like, about 37 minutes. And because we're in a short week, I think we have less topics. So let's go ahead and open it up if anyone has any questions, and you and I can keep on talking. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. We'll bring you up, and you can ask it.
Yeah. The other thing I want to bring to NIO, that this is, I think people probably, when they talk about NIO, they think about battery swapping. But NIO announced some additional numbers on their charging network. And they are actually the brand that has the most charging piles set up in China. And right, 80% of the electricity charged through their charging network is to non-NIO brands. And they're planning to build, they already have 3,000 charging stations in China. And they're planning to add 10,000 charging piles this year alone. And most of that, I guess, are through the dual, the charging and the swap stations, right? So just And then, also BYD, right? BYD announced their earnings as well. And the two things I thought stood out for me was their R&D spending investment and their vehicle margins are both higher than Tesla in the first half of 2023.
Yeah. So, and their growth in profit was 205%. So they made $1.5 billion in the first half of this year. They sold about 1.25 million cars. And you and I know that the second half of every year in China is the sales rally half. So they could get to easily over 3 million units this year. They're likely going to be outselling Volkswagen brand. And we've mentioned that before this year in China. And I just don't know what's going to stop them.
Yeah. Basically, the numbers are 3,300,000 total sales and export. That's what we're looking at this year for BYD.
While
so a tenth of sales are exported. Yeah.
It's weird though, Lei, because we hear these CEOs, NIO, talking about the good news second half of the year, 55 to 57,000 units. BYD's crushing it. We don't expect any hiccups from them. XPeng looks like you said, what did you say? Xiaoli. The three, XPeng, Li Auto, and what did you call them?
Wei Xiaoli.
They are the top three where it seems like they should be, like you'd mentioned. But what's hanging over the economy and uncertainty? So I'm still waiting for an announcement from the Chinese government to increase some sort of stimulus, man. I with the way the economy is going and the current price war, which is just battering companies.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And BYD, they're ready to cut prices. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I don't know how we get to the 8.5 to 9 million, right? Without more stimulus. Do you agree with that?
I'm less optimistic than I was earlier in the year that we're going to get the 9 million units. That's.
Well, you said 9 with about 1 million in exports.
Exported, yeah, including export, yeah.
So we have a question, Lei, and I'm going to read it and you can answer it first. Potential buyers in Europe are stepping out only because the lack of NIO infrastructure. I'm not sure what stepping out means. Why there is not a priority to build more swap stations around Europe?
The numbers, I don't remember the latest numbers, but they just opened one in the Netherlands, and they have like 25-ish in Europe now, swap stations. That's pretty significant already, I think. But given the actual volumes versus the number of swap stations, I think the ratio is much lower than in China, I would guess.
Without question. I think there's a few different things going on here. I think there's a chicken and the egg because they're not selling many units yet, so they are still unsure of how many swap stations are necessary, where they should be strategically placed. And I think there's a ton more friction because now we're talking, because you mentioned Europe, but as a European, there's 27, 29 countries, right, in Europe. And so the regs are different, partners are going to be different. So the level of complexity when compared to China and adding swapping stations in provinces in China has to be much, much higher. And so they have to find partners too that will help them. So they've partnered with Shell, I believe, and Total Energy to help them with swapping stations and charging infrastructure. But I think it's those two things. I think it's the chicken and the egg. We don't have a lot of vehicles, so we're gonna slow our swap station rollouts. And then when they enter each of these countries, there's a lot more complex issues at hand versus what I think they are easily able to handle in China now. So
Yeah, it's not as fast and convenient and easy as in China.
I think folks are looking at how fast things happen in China and they're like, why can't that happen in US? Why can't that happen in Europe? And you and I know that it would never be that fast in the United States or Europe. So thanks for the question, Simple Mente. Anything else, brother? Let's do this. What are you looking forward to in Munich? Since you and I will be, I'm taking off on Friday afternoon. You're taking off tomorrow.
Tomorrow at about this time. So in about 24 hours.
Do you have a long layover?
I'm leaving out of Charlotte, and I hope the Idalia doesn't affect the flights. I don't think so, but...
So you fly from Logan to Charlotte to Munich?
No, I fly from Hartford to Charlotte
Hartford,
and then
okay.
to Munich.
You have a 17-hour layover or something?
No. Like more like 3 or 4 hours.
Okay, good.
So I get into Munich on Friday at 7 a.m. in the morning local time.
有什么事?
So I'll probably have some free time on Friday, probably do some sightseeing.
喝ein Maß?
Huh?
喝ein Maß? So I wrote in my newsletter, I think I told you this, I was like, let's have a pint. And I was corrected by my German friend.
Yeah.
No, it's ein Maß. But
I'm looking forward to it, obviously, 2 things. The German legacies, because they're announcing huge next generation EV platforms, right? The MMA and the Neue Klasse from Mercedes and BMW, and obviously the China EV Inc. Let's just say the China Inc., not only EVs, because some of the chip LiDAR AV companies will be there as well. So Horizon, Hesai, Deep Route, eCarX, and then besides that, I mean, just the
Leap Motor.
XPeng, BYD, Leap Motor.
NIO is going to have a presence, but not going to be at IAA. So
Right. Willem Lee will be there. He's speaking. Yeah, and then maybe just to test out some of the vehicles if we have time, right? There's some test drives.
yeah.
And just to experience how really this IA mobility is in terms of the format, right? Because there's the show itself and exhibition grounds, and then there's the open space in the city, right?
Yeah, so I'm the same way. I've never been to Munich. Looking forward to it. I'm coming in Friday and arriving Saturday so I could get rid of some of my jet lag. I wanted to hit the ground running on Monday.
Speaking of jet lag, right now I have a European jet lag. So, I wake up pretty early every morning this week.
Oh, dude, I woke up at 4 o'clock yesterday to get on a 7 a.m. flight.
Yeah.
And then, so I had this event from 4 o'clock till about 10 o'clock. And it's a 20-minute walk to my hotel downtown, like around 25th and Lexington. And then CNBC emailed me during the day, and we're like, would you like to be interviewed at 11:15? And so I'm sweating because I was just walking. And then I was like, oh my God. So then I had to kind of get like cleaned up. And of course, this hotel, the lights are terrible. So it looks like I'm in this dark room.
Well,
So if you guys see it and don't make fun of me too much, because I believe I tried to do the lighting a little bit better. And so anyways, but
busy man.
Hey, so if you listeners are in Munich, get in touch, because I think one or two of the things is there's a couple of people that subscribe to the newsletter that want to meet up. So I'm going to meet up with some folks. I think that's the other thing too, because we had so much fun in Shanghai meeting up with all the people we interact with but never met, right, Lei? And then last year in Detroit, you had a ton of fun.
Yeah, that was
and we
fun,
met with a bunch of people too that we've either spoken with but never met. So I think those are the best parts, right? Because I'm curious about BMW and Mercedes, but I almost feel like I can predict what they're going to say a little bit. And I don't think there's going to be too many surprises from the Chinese EV companies. I think they're going to expand on their plans for European market.
And then the biggest suspense, at least, whether we're going to see some type of announcement between, let's say, a German company and a Chinese company. That's the biggest suspense.
I think
Right.
I think there will be some sort of partnership, but I don't know how much of a sizzle there's going to be. I think it'll be more hype than anything. So, anyways, that's all I had, sir.
I'll see you in Munich.
Everyone, thanks for joining us early this week. And we will try to sort out as early as possible when we will be broadcasting next week. Hopefully we can say we'll broadcast from Munich, because I think that would be really fun. But Thanks again for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We will talk with you all next week.
Or next time. Bye-bye.
Next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, to be announced. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Li, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.